Hi, my name is Sarah Cogan, and I'm here with,
Carlo Gonzalez Moss.
and we help filmmakers create their visions. I help filmmakers understand choosing, when they're choosing, why they're choosing it for their lookbooks when it comes to crafting their creative vision. While Carlo, my good friend,
So I run a company called Moranti Media. We specialize in the art of pitching. That means digging into pitching, to pitch decks, lookbooks, all that good stuff, and putting creators in the best possible position to sell their TV shows and movies to potential buyers and financiers.
so basically, I help filmmakers like yourself choose the images based on your story. And Carlo helps you package those images and beautiful pitch decks so that you can go get your film greenlit.
That's right.
So today we're going to talk about make lookbooks and the difference between lookbooks and what goes into all of them, and also the terrifying lack of information out there. So
It's the Wild West. There are literally no rules. We're making it up as we go along because for a long time, like all those documents, pitch decks and lookbooks, it's been this walled garden situation where anybody who's figured it out doesn't want to share their secrets. And I think that's both of our impulse in starting our companies was to break down those walled gardens and get that information out to everybody.
Exactly. You know, it's funny. Telling people, I don't know if I told you this, I've been telling people that they need to do lookbooks since 2014, 8 years, 9 years, maybe 2013. Because I was like, well, you're going to go into a short film or you're going to go into your feature and you have no budget. If you do a lookbook, then people know what you need, so you can start figuring it out. And I feel like before we go into like things that go in your lookbook and the purpose of a lookbook, we should clarify what a lookbook is versus a pitch deck and what you and I as practitioners call these things.
Right. And I think a lot of the confusion for creators starts from the fact that most people in our industry really use those terms interchangeably. And so what we're going to try to do today is define exactly what the difference is there so that we're all clear on what we're talking about.
And I think I will say, I know for myself, when people are like, can you look at my pitch deck? I go, in some degrees, there are pieces that also overlap between the two. So let's also talk about that. I loved what you said earlier to me before we started recording, which was that pitch decks are more writer focused and focused on the script and all of that, maybe even a little more demographic focused, whereas lookbooks are really about the creative vision of the director, right? How are you telling this story? And, you know, people listen to how you say it over what you say. And in film, the how you say it is the way you design your film. And that's, as Carlos heard me talk, I believe in 4 layers storytelling within film. We've got the script, and that's super important. That's our baseline. And then the world building, that's that physical 3-dimensional world in which we're creating. Right? So we get story type at the script level, genre at the world building level. The 3rd layer of storytelling is how we actually shoot this world, right? The cinematography. So I call that revelation of form. How do we see and experience the body as it relates to the audience and as it relates to the way we want to approach and access the story, to the assemblage. All of those choices, which is the editing, by the way, the assemblage, all of those choices from the world building through to your assemblage to the final edit, those are all aesthetic design choices that you're making. That is your how. Today, we are looking at how are you crafting that how so you can articulate it when you're pitching your film and when you're putting together your lookbook. And that's the value of these 2 pieces of material that Carlo and I focus on.
Yeah, exactly. I think, the thing that I always tell my clients is that your pitch book and your pitch deck and your lookbook, they convey a shorthand. Everything that's in there, from the font that you use, from the size of each individual image, they're conveying a shorthand. And ultimately, when I'm working with clients, the thing that you're trying to get across to that person at the other end of the table is, if you hand me several $1 million, I am not going to get you fired. I'm a professional. I know what I'm doing, and I have a clarity of vision that the thing that I want that's in my head can get out onto the screen. And the only thing in between us is the money that you're going to give me.
So true. I love that. I'm not going to get you fired.
Because that's what we're trying to convey. Because if I show up and I've got like a half done Word doc with some pictures thrown on it, that tells the other person, number one, I don't value your time. I didn't take the time to do my homework. And number two, yeah, I'm not a big attention to detail person. So if you give me some money, you may or may not end up with nothing to show.
I'm not gonna lie, that sounds really painful. I think it's funny though, because asking to raise several $1 million to do a film, or even if you're starting off smaller with like $500,000, if you're not willing to invest skill sets necessary to craft a lookbook and hiring professionals like yourself and myself to bring your film to life, are you really committed? Is always what I come up to. And I feel like that's what these producers are going to say. Are you really committed to this craft? And I think it is that. It is well, why are you choosing to tell the story in the way you're going to choose it? And that's where your creative vision as a filmmaker comes out to play, right? That's why you want to choose, the lookbook and put it together in the pitch deck, and be really mindful about how you tell the story from the pitch deck, or even the crowdfunding video, to the lookbook, through to the final film. I know one of my students for my course from text to moving images, she was like, oh man, Sarah, we took the log line, like based on a conversation with you. She had reviewed her director's lookbook with me. And she was like, we took the log line of her film and were able to translate it into a visual element that went across her lookbook, which went across her crowdfunding video, which went across her website, which then turned into how they approach their marketing and the way that they basically created this graphic branding for their series. And so all from like stopping and taking a moment to go, this doesn't have to be pretty. This gets to be what is necessary for the film. Right. And I think that's one of the things is people assume lookbooks and pitch decks have to look a certain way. And it's really about how do you capture the essence of the story you're telling? I mean, for you, Carlo, what is one of the things that you have to have when it comes to showing your creative vision in a pitch deck or lookbook to help people get into your ideas?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing that I hammer home all the time is clarity in every sense, because you're taking something that's sitting in your head and you're trying to convey it to somebody who's never heard it, never experienced it, anything like that. So everything needs to point to clarity, whether it's the language, whether it's the images. Every image that you're using in there should have a very specific reason why it's in there. It should be telling that story, like you were talking about. It should be contributing to that story, not just oh well, I thought this. I'm doing a Western, and so this is a pretty picture of the Southwest, and so that counts, right? That gives you an idea. It's conveying to that person on the other end of the table that you know how to communicate your vision as clearly as possible. And this is the first swing that you have at communicating that vision. And if you can't communicate it here, how in the hell are you going to communicate it to the rest of your team when you don't have the luxury of a PDF and images and research that you can do when you're trying to just speak to them and convey your vision? There's no chance there.
Yeah, well, and that's one of the reasons I like lookbooks too, because lookbooks I feel like are way more comprehensive for the overall aesthetic choice. But one of the things that came up for me while you're talking, Carlo, is the fact that if you can't convey yourself in still images in this is like what just popped into my mind, is if you can't convey yourself in still images in that meeting, if a picture's worth 1,000 words, what is it? Like if we have 24 frames per second, that's 24,000 words per second in each film, right? Like, so, and that gets bigger and bigger as we have higher frame rates. So if that's the case, then are you able to say what you intend to say when you're at 24 frames per second, saying 24,000 words per second visually? What is the container of the story, and why are your standard shots the standard shots, and when do you break your rules, right? And I know, like in my process, I show people, look, when it's really about how do you take a script from black and white copy on the page into something that's going to be compelling and interesting. So we're always looking at what are the non-negotiable storytelling elements, right? You were saying earlier something, I was like, oh yeah, that's what I call the visual storytelling language. Like the choices that you make creatively, like it's your visual storytelling language. Each film has its own language. That's why you see things like, people love to look at Wes Anderson, for example, because he's got a very specific visual storytelling language. Kubrick uses color in a very specific way. These are things that we see, you know, we get a lot of freeze frames with Scorsese, right? Like that's one of his storytelling languages, to emphasize a moment is to make you pause on it. So what are those non-negotiable storytelling language moments so that you create your film based on that, especially if you're on a tight budget, because then you're really getting the moments that matter the most. And then you can back yourself out of that with your budget and go, okay, we figured the rest of this out. Or even with, you can go, what are those big moments? How do they relate to one another? And then what do we need to do to string them together? And then all of a sudden, once you start asking those questions, you've got your, these are the shots. There, this is the character transformation, if that's an important thing. I don't know if any of that speaks to you.
Yeah, and
in your
well,
process.
and right. Well, what popped in my head as you were talking about that is just the importance of every inch of the page in that lookbook. And this the same way that a filmmaker has a storytelling language that appears on screen, everything that you put in your lookbook conveys something to the person on the other end of the table. It goes back to that shorthand point, right? Where there's something's going to be conveyed about the style of the film and your style as a filmmaker. If your lookbook has really big, beautiful, vibrant images that are just sitting on the page by themselves, versus if you have, let's say, a page about a character where you have, you know, maybe a gritty textured background with a photo laid on top of it and some text. Every font that you use, every single element should be conveying some, well, let me not even say should be, because it is conveying something, whether you like it, whether you want it to or not. If you're not paying attention to it and you're not, you know, adhering to an attention to detail, what it's going to convey is, I'm not ready to take the reins of my own movie or my own TV show because I'm just using defaults, right? But all of that should be visual language that's being conveyed to the person on the other end of the table, because every page that you have is valuable real estate where you can say something about yourself and about the project that you're making.
100%. I'm always amazed. One of the things that I talk about in my training is just, and this is something I actually learned from my dad. He would, you know, I'd be like talking to you guys, look, it's never about having a answer, right? In America, we definitely focus on a answer, right? I'm going to call your name, ask you a question, and you better have an answer right away, right? That's a answer. Whereas what we really want is the answer. So you can easily go out and find an image of a car parked on the street, but is it the right kind of car shot in the right kind of way, in the right kind of lighting to convey the story that you're telling? Or is it just a car? When you can live in that space of the unknown to make sure that you're searching and finding the thing that really serves your story, that's where you then start having magic. And in my humble-ish opinion, you know, of like, so it's never about a answer, it's the answer. And oftentimes if you look at something and you're like, it doesn't quite resonate, it's usually because they put in a answer, and I feel like, rather than the answer.
Right. And it's, you know, whenever clients hire me to put together lookbooks for my, you know, at the end of the project, I always send them everything that I pulled for them, everything that I built. And they're always just like shocked at the fact that I'm sending them like 8 gigs worth of images, because I'm sitting there going through and like, there's going to be 150 different shots of a car in a desert. My process isn't sending that to them and being like, pick one. My process, and part of what you're hiring me for, is to go through those and curate it and go, all right, which one is going to convey what's inside of this script? What's going to put us into that world? Because ultimately, and this goes for lookbooks, pitch decks, in-room pitches, everything, what you're looking to do is to activate the imagination of the person on the other end of the table.
Yeah.
You want them being able to live in that world.
100%. I love that. And I don't know, you know, I'm a huge cognitive science nerd and really into the cognitive science of storytelling. And so as you're saying that, and you're talking about engaging people's imagination with these images, it's really about, you know, we as an audience and as humans like in our stories to be tangible. And so you're really creating that tangibility that they can go, yes, I've experienced this thing, and so I understand what that would look and feel like. And I've experienced that thing, and so I understand what that looks and feels like. And so now I'm really getting this sense of what this world is, you know, and you know, that's where we want to go, you know. And I'm all about, when it comes to using these elements, how are you creating one, it's like one, you're doing a story through the entire lookbook. It is you are telling a story when you do your lookbook. You're telling a story when you do your pitch deck. They really are. If you can get past the pitch deck conversation, and then they're going to want to see your lookbook. What else you got for us to see based on what you're doing? What's inspired you? What's, where are you going with this? Because as we're learning now, no longer is making a film going to get you noticed. You have to do something more. You have to do something that really grabs people's attention. And that is because this is a visual medium, which I would say it's a visual medium based in literature. Like, the scripts are literature, everything else is visual. And I think it's personally, I think that it's a secret a lot of filmmakers have, that they're not as confident with this visual side of it, because it's not taught. It is not taught in film school. And they're just starting to figure this out. But like, they don't teach you, well, how do you use color to do world building, or texture to use world building and create conflict or harmony? And how do you, so those are like the things that you can really take people through in your lookbook of, this is how, when the world first started, we first meet our character and this is their world. It's this beautiful, harmonious place. But then this moment happens, this rift, and we get sent into this kind of world. Whether that's an emotional world, whether that's a psychological world, whether that is an actual physical, like, journey into another world, physical world, at least for me, I go, that's what we want to see. Where we start, what triggers the change, because that's another cognitive science thing. We want to know when and why people change, and when and why their world changes, so we can plan for that better. And all this is in Lisa Cron's book, Wired for Story. If you haven't read it, it's fantastic. I'm obsessed with it. I reference her all the time.
That's awesome. And it's, and to that point, like, a lookbook and a pitch deck, like, they provide these, for lack of a better term, unfair advantages, where you are able to convey so much through every element of that. As you're telling this visual story, like we were talking about before, everything that's in there can convey something about your story. Just what the size of the text that you have on there, the amount of negative space that you're using, all of that can tell the story of what you're doing. How, like, if an image is slightly askew, that's telling more about the film that you want to make, and you're conveying all of that. And that's why these are such useful tools, because they can speak in a way that sending in a Word document just can't. It's all showing instead of telling.
Yeah. Well, and color is subjective, and line and form can be subjective, because in one world, curved, soft lines are the norm. So it's the severity then of how organic and curved the lines are, versus in another world, maybe they're straight, and so any sort of deviation is cataclysmic in the world. Just to use that as an example. So let's talk about that, things that actually need to go in these things, because that's I mean, I know you and I were talking earlier. I was like, I went through about 20 or 30 articles on the first 2.5 pages of like Google search, and I found one article that was even remotely good on what was actually supposed to be in there, but it was like not even comprehensive. And there were things that, like, I was like, well, we need to clarify around that. What goes into a pitch deck that definitely does not go in a lookbook for you?
The biggest general thing is a hell of a lot more words, right? That's kind of the hallmark of the pitch deck is it's going to have more words. I think that you're going to have way more language about plot and story, because if you're a director coming into a lookbook, those are almost givens, and you're showing those visually. Whereas, a specific pitch deck is you're almost pitching the story yourself. So you're going to want a section in there about, if it's a TV show, you're going to have a description of your pilot, description of episode 1, 2, 3, and 4. If you've got a lookbook, you're probably a director, and you might be coming in for one episode, and so you're trying to catch the the aesthetic of the show. Or if you're a director coming in trying to pitch your film, the script is going to be a completely separate thing, and so you're going to want to convey so much more with image as opposed to words. So I would say, like, a big thing that stands out to me is you're not going to have a full description of the story or the plot in a lookbook, whereas you're definitely going to have that in a pitch deck.
As a designer coming in, I'm always like, I just want both of them together. I always like that. Just put the pitch deck and the lookbook together for me in one giant thing, so I can then just come in and download your whole vision. Which is the other reason why lookbooks are so important in pitch, like beyond pitch decks. Because pitch decks are like you said, they're all about the words. The words, the images support the words. I think you had said earlier today, and then
exactly.
Whereas as I mentioned, when you do lookbooks, you still need words, because you can't assume when you put an image on a page that people read it in the way that you read it. People pay attention to different things. This is the beauty of what we do, because they'll find nuances that you're like, I guess I could see you say that. You know what I mean?
Right.
I didn't think that was there, but I could see that. Interesting. Hadn't noticed that before. Specific, and you go, we're looking at this image because of the texture, or we're looking at this because of the line quality, or the composition and the way it's composed. This is how we're gonna then people can go, oh, I understand what you want me to look at, versus what are all these images on the page? What am I looking at here? And there's a fine line, because I've definitely seen lookbooks that I found confusing, because it's like image, text, image, text, image. And you're like, I need this. It needs to be very cleanly laid out so that people's eyes are directed really quickly. Everyone's eyes are drawn to contrast. So the highest contrast point on your page is going to be the most visually stimulating. That means if you put borders around your images and they're against a dark background with a light border, or vice versa, people's eyes are going to go to the border. They're not going to go to the images inside the border. That's just like one example of things to pay attention to and be mindful of, based on how we read images and how we experience what's called visual weight. And so the higher the contrast, the more visually stimulating and attention grabbing an element is.
I think that's great. I'm literally making a mental note of that when I'm building lookbooks and pitch decks now. And I think to that point, another thing that always jumps out to me when building a lookbook, like we were talking about, is really being mindful of the focal point and where you're directing your reader's eyes to, keeping the amount of text that you have. My favorite, one of my favorite kind of styles of designing a lookbook is, if we're going into a section, like let's say we're hitting a section specifically about the location or a specific theme, having one big hero image with a lot of negative space that has, your 2 to 3 sentence context descriptor in there, with maybe, a big title that has some design to it that's going to convey something, followed up by a really clean collage that has, 5 to 6 specific images that then support what you said in the page before, as opposed to trying to just throw everything onto 1 or 2 pages and be like, oh, there's a little bit of room for text here, making every choice feel absolutely deliberate.
Oh, I love that. It's totally true. I think there's a huge myth, like one of the myths that definitely needs to get busted, is we're not constrained to 10 pages anymore. It's so easy.
Exactly.
Like, people are so used to swiping, and people skim things. They don't actually read them. We can utilize that to move the story along, and people expect it. So I feel like gone are the days where we have to, like you said, cram everything onto one page, because people are used to digital packets now, and they can be 20 pages if they're well crafted and interesting. People are going to want to look at them.
The rule of thumb that I always give my clients, and this is just a complete, based on my own experience having been a studio executive before, as long as there's a 2 in front of the page number, so basically as long as it's under 29 pages, I'm opening it up and I don't care. If you're sending me a document that has 55 pages, I'm like, oh, and it might be 1 picture per page, right? It might actually be like a fairly short document, but it's like 55 pages. I'm like, oh my God.
Well, so here's my thing with that, because part of storytelling and what we do is about juxtaposition and the relationships that we're creating from image to image, right? That's literally the editing process. So when you put it in that kind of flip book style of one image at a time, you're denying, at least from my own personal experience, You're denying the viewer the understanding to be able to relate the images together in a way that you'd be able to get in a film, because we're going back and forth between different things, right? We're going back and forth between a wide and a close up. And so you're breaking the relationship. And then it's almost as if in order to get the full picture, you have to take the whole thing apart, collage it out yourself and go, oh, this is the story. Oh, this is the theme behind all this. And I say that from not just like from literal lookbooks that were handed to me of like, these are the inspirations behind this character, and it's just literally a Word document of images, no descriptions, nothing. And I'm going, okay, well, let me pull out what are the commonalities between these images, so I can then turn around, go to them, and go, oh, these are the commonalities. Now we can talk about actually moving forward with your design. Versus what I do, which is let's put together a whole, essentially a research board. And that's the thing too, when we hear people use terms like a cinematographer's lookbook, I go, no, that's a research deck. Right. That's inspiration. That's not a lookbook. That's a research deck. Whereas a lookbook in my mind is really that director's vision of everything that we, how we shoot it, what the world is, who the characters are, when you talk, I kind of believe that locations and characters being included depends upon the type of story. If a location is a major character in a story, then yeah, we see it. If it's not, we don't see locations. That's fine. Like there was one film where it was like, oh, there aren't any locations. Even when you describe your film, you're not talking about locations as a main thing. So, I loved your idea of like a title image that explains the world and then a collage of images to fill in the gaps. How do you feel about character? What are the thoughts that you have with that?
Typically when I'm designing a lookbook, I like to use that same structure for characters. I like there to be some amount of text, language about the character, because I want the director to be able to convey like, hey, this is, whether it's their personal connection of like, when I read the script, here's what I connected to with the character, or I want to make sure that the character is shot in this particular way so that we convey this element of their personality. Again, that, you're giving context to somebody reading it, so you're not just throwing images at them. So typically what I like to do, with a character section, you section it off, you have, your 4 or 5 main characters or whatever. And each project is different ultimately, because you may have attachments, you may have specific people that you're trying to go out to. But I like to use that same structure where I've got a hero page where it's either big negative space image of somebody that could be that character, right? Whether it's pulled from another film, whether it's pulled from a TV show, or we know specifically the type of, it's a Michael B. Jordan type. So we're going to get an image of Michael B. Jordan and then put it on, either pull it straight from a film, right, where there's negative space and you can lay the text on top of it. But it better be a really nice, clean image where there's nothing clashing with that text. Or I like to build a template that has, let's say if it's a horror movie, we've got like a graphic background that's got, maybe it's cement, a dark color, and then we're laying a textured photo on it. We've done a little bit of something to the photo. Name of the character big, and then your 2 or 3 sentences about that character, followed by a collage. And that and the same way, and that collage can either be like, I always like to hit a combination of photos that really embody what the character is, who they are, their personality, their theme. And if there are specifics about what the person looks like, polls that look like that person, so that we can start to activate that imagination. And in that, but in that first page, I want to make sure the 2 things that I'm getting are that you're connecting the name of the character and the image as big as possible. If you're that person on the other end of the table, when I'm going through later and I'm hitting different elements of the film, I don't want you to have to think, oh wait, what was the name of that one of the main character? Is that who we're talking about here? Right. I want that embedded in your head. So I'm going to have a lot of clarity in the image and in the actual name there, so that it's just being pounded into you over and over again.
That's a really good point you're bringing up about if you really want people to identify with a character in a lookbook, that having that single image that really represents them with their name. Just thinking about the way that we process, like if there's too much information, I'm thinking very specifically of this goal language I've been learning and how to properly set goals. And you literally have to be very specific, not like this and that and that, which is if you have a whole page, collage page, that's what's there is this, that, and that, versus this is it. And so this is the goal, right? One quick sentence, that's it, or statement. And so like using that idea, I think is really great. I'm always hesitant to put, personally, I always think you have to be really careful about putting characters from films in your lookbook, because for a couple of reasons. One, the big one, and this is always something that designing films has come up for me, which is if we are pulling something from someone else's film directly, we're taking their story and putting a piece of their story in our film. The goal isn't to literally copy and paste, because that's not your story, right. That's not your character, that's not your role. The goal is to have that be an inspiration and turn it into your own. How can you take that iconic thing, that happened, and make it your own, make it reference it, but not have it be exactly that? And I think that's the mistake that I often see. You have to be really mindful. And I think too, you have to be careful about using, I personally don't always want to see celebrity faces in character decks, and headshots are completely off the table, because a headshot of any actor is meant to be a blank slate. Whether it's their comedy or their drama headshot, it is meant to be a blank slate for everybody to go, oh yeah, I could see that person being this person, not an invitation into who the character is. So unless they're actually attached, I'm like, there's no reason to have, unless you're like, well, I really want people to know my casting choices based on, people's history. And then I go, great, then put that very distinctly separate. Ideal casting would be, but most people I talk to aren't even interested in that unless they're attached.
Yeah, it also brings up a really good point that I've run into with a few different clients, of making sure that if you're using comps in anything, whether it's a lookbook or a pitch deck, there's a big difference between an actor and a character. And and I see those get conflated all the time, where somebody might use Charlie Day as a comp. And my immediate question is, Charlie Day, the actor, or Charlie Kelly, the character that he plays on Always Sunny in Philadelphia? Because those are two very different people that often get conflated. The rule of thumb that I always use, whether with comps or even just creating character pages, if there's one, then you're just plagiarizing. And that's why we have that very stereotypical Hollywood structure of he's this meets this with a little bit of this thrown in, right? Because that's how you make it your own, right? He's this meets this turned up to 11. Figuring out the way that you convey that element, because you want to utilize shorthand, so you don't have to describe everything about the character strictly in the abstract. You want to give people things that they can hang their hat on. But ultimately, you have to make sure that you're making it your own, because if you're just picking a random character that you like and you're like, yeah, I want him in my movie, that's somebody else's movie. That's not your own thing, right? It's, like, if you want to be a cover band, okay, go be a cover band. But if you actually want to make your own music that's influenced by the music that you grew up with, you have to write your own songs,
Beautiful. Great analogy. Totally true. 100%. Let's go kind of order wise of what we think needs to be on a lookbook. We definitely a title page, right? That's first. I'm not a fan of paragraphs at the beginning of anything. I want people to get drawn in. So maybe it's just, I like to do like a log line, or that's what I like to see personally. Just again, it goes back to people skim. Or if you're going to do a summary, a short paragraph, doing it, that's when you can utilize that kind of flip chart idea or flip book idea of like image with a sentence, and then turn the page and then this happens, and then that happens, which causes this to happen. And then this is the dilemma that they have. That draws us in. And then now we can start going, who are the players? Go into an actual summary and an actual, that's like my personal, just if I'm greeted with a giant chunk of text right away, I'm always like, I don't have time for this. And then I'll skip it. I won't even read it, because I'll go, well, what else is here? And then if I don't like what's in there, then I go, never mind. And I just toss it away.
Yeah. And for me, because I think because I came up as a writer, and still am a writer in a lot of ways, all be drawn to text probably more than you are. But I think that the mistake that happens so often is we are creatives. A lot of us really like the sound of our own voice. So we put a Bible on the first page, just a full novel of like, really want you to get my intention, really want you to get everything that I'm going for here. So let me lay it out. And it comes from this place of really wanting to be understood, which is a common thing with artists, right? Of that need to be understood. So we over explain. And if there's going to be text there, you want to keep it short and sweet. And it should be a creator's statement, and it should say something. It should be, you need to know this before you go in. Otherwise, there's no need for it. Start with an image that's going to be captivating for you, that can say the 1,000 words, so you don't have to write the 1,000 words.
Right. You know, or it could be that coupled with a tagline. So then after that, after you kind of introduce them, they've dipped their toes in the story, and now then where do you like to start? Do you then jump into like a bigger paragraph, or then do you like to go into character? Do you go into location? How do you make those decisions based on where you go? And then I know you and I both agree that any director statement or like bios and stuff and contact info that goes at the end. Nobody cares about you. Yeah. I love you as a creative, but the reality is they need to buy into the story before they're going to be interested in your story, unless it's a true story.
Exactly. And I was going to say a good rule of thumb is like, if there's going to be text at the beginning, it had better set a tone. If it's there, that's what it needs to do. It needs to set a tone, bring us into the world in a way that we wouldn't be able to get there without it.
Yeah.
And so, and then from there, typically I encourage my clients. And the thing I always tell my clients is like, look, this is your project. So I'm going to build it however you want, but I'm going to tell you my best practices. Once we have that opening, usually want a log line in there. And then it's also very dependent. I think this is something important for people to understand. It's very dependent on what your relationship is to the project. And who you're sending this to. Because if it's being sent to somebody who already has a good sense of the story, you can be a little bit lighter on the story points. Whereas if it's somebody going in cold, or it's somebody that you're trying to get to finance the movie that you need to introduce it to, then you're going to want to start with a little bit more of a story overview.
Yeah. I feel like too with pitch decks, we might want to see more on demographics, or by the time we get to a lookbook, demographics aren't really a part of it.
Right. And right. I always encourage with pitch decks, anything that's business focused, like say demographics, maybe viewership, maybe audience, after the story. With everything, get to the story as quick as possible, because the story is what makes someone a believer. That's what people are going to connect to. It's the story, and it's the relationships, and it's the characters. Those things are what people are going to buy and believe in.
You know, when we create worlds that are engaging and bring people in, they come back for more. Franchisability is, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on which side of the table you're on, a big part of what we do now. And so we get to be aware of that. I mean, I always tell people that I'll know I've made it when people dress up as my characters for Halloween. Permeating the mass consciousness at some level is the goal.
Speaking from experience, that's the best feeling in the world.
It's true.
Most popular girls.
Yes. Oh my God, I love it. Carlo, what else? Is there anything else that we need to tell people about when it comes to lookbooks and all the things that they should know about?
I'll give you two. Number one, understand how to use negative space. That's like the number one thing that jumps out to me between an amateur lookbook and a professional lookbook and or pitch deck is an amateur lookbook is going to have fonts that are too big, the page filled to the gills with images, with things aren't going to be sized correctly. Understand negative space because it conveys confidence. It conveys, hey, I'm going to leave this black space because I want you to focus strictly on these words for this one image. And and being able to pull and identify images that utilize that negative space are absolutely huge, and they're gold. And there are different websites and programs that like specifically you can pull images that are left focused, that are right focused, that are center focused, and those kinds of things, so that you're not laying text on top of someone's face and stuff like that. That's always a huge one for me with lookbooks. Yeah.
That's like you mentioned kind of earlier, the packets that you send of images. I think people underestimate the amount of visual research you do. And what I always recommend is go out and literally just say yes to every image that even resonates with you and on a subliminal degree, and then start sorting them and see what patterns show up, because what you want is to see what's there, not what you think is there, but what's actually showing up for you in the space. So it might be that you're like, oh, I'm really drawn to high contrast shadows for this film. I didn't even realize that, because by living in the experience of pulling all the images and going out and collecting a large amount of data, like essentially data and research for yourself to then draw from, you can go, what really speaks to me and where am I at with all of that? So I would say that that's my number one thing, is do 4 times as much research as you think you should, and then go through and start culling and start designating what goes where and why. You just never know when something will inspire you in a way you hadn't anticipated it to. And the word to discover literally means to find something you weren't expecting. And so that's what the research process is about. And that's what the lookbook process gets to be about, is how do we discover more about the story we're telling? How do we discover more so that when we finally get to hiring department heads and budgeting our film, we actually know what we need versus what we think we need. We can then hire people based on our creative vision rather than going, well, we have to wait for their expertise to be able to make the decisions, right? Like I help filmmakers understand that visual storytelling arc from a design perspective so that they can start crafting their creative vision before they hire department heads when it's still really cheap.
Exactly. Love that.
So with that, is there anything else, or did we cover it all?
Sarah, I have one question for you that I get all the time from people that I'm sure anybody watching this is probably curious of. When you build lookbooks, what do you build it in? What program do you use?
Depends on the purpose. I also do a lot of photoshopping of my images. Like if there's any single thing in the image I don't want to be a part of the conversation, I change it. So I'll change color, I'll blur out a background, I'll do whatever it takes to change it, because everything counts. I mean, I like Canva because it's easy, but I make a lot of my own graphics and then I just dump them in because it's easy to move around. But I've also done things on Google Slides and Keynote, PowerPoint. I'm not as big of a fan of. So, but don't do it in Photoshop because it's too many layers. It's much easier to do it in a program where you can drag and drop. My downside with Canva is it's way too easy to grab a bunch of stuff. And so then all of a sudden you're like, oh crap, I moved a bunch of things around. So
it's the worst.
That's the word, but Canva's got a lot of great things as well. So if you're new to graphic design and like figuring out layouts of pages, start there, because it gives you a sense of what you can do, and then start playing and customizing. Or go ahead and print things out, cut them out and lay it out on paper. Go old school and then take photos of it. Maybe that serves your story. If you're telling a story about a serial killer, it could be great if you actually made like fake pinboards of your research. Think outside of the digital box, because there are so many, and in my course I also talk about all the ways you can connect with story outside of just visuals, like just images, through object collage, through sculpture, through floral collages, like all these different things, like depending on like whatever you need to tell your story to figure it out. Like there's no wrong answer. There's only right answers in this exploration process. It's all about getting yourself in touch with your story. So
we used to, when I was running my stop motion studio, one of kind of the things that we said all the time was, what starts out as limitation eventually turns into aesthetic signature.
Totally. And
that's what happened with us with Most Popular Girls, is the limitations that we had because we didn't know stop motion. Eventually that became the look. And so if you're limited in that way, I love that idea of cutting stuff out in real life and then bring it into the digital world, because that's going to say so much. That's going to convey so much to the person on the other end of the table.
Totally. And also go out, if you can't find the image you want, go make it.
Yep.
Go make it.
Exactly.
Somehow. So, well, Carlo, I feel like we've answered a ton. I think you and I both have to get back to the things we need to do today. Where can people find you? If
you want more information about what I do, about my company, you can go to Maranty.com, Maranty. It's a company that I named after my grandfather's old boat. We're also at Maranty Media across all the socials. And then if you want to know more about me, at Carlo Moss across Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all that good stuff.
Fantastic. Highly recommend you guys checking them out. For myself, you can find me at sarahcogan.com. You can find my course there as well, so you can take it whenever you want. You get access to over 14 hours of training, all on the cognitive science of storytelling, how you break down the worlds of your films, and how to literally structure your story from scene to scene visually based on conflict and harmony, and then how to utilize the 5 elements of design to amplify your story. Let's say everything we mean to say with those 24,000 words per second, right? So again, you can find me at sarahcogan.com or at Sarah Cogan Designs across social. Thanks for joining us today. Let us know what you thought of the conversation. And if there are any questions that you have, Carlo and I will try to answer them in the chat and by chatting them in the comments. Thank you.
Thanks,
Carlo.
y'all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.